Back. So something I feel like I should mention. So if you're watching these things in order, you're going to notice a weird time jump between the first one and then the fourth one. And the reason why is because it turns out we had thought that all the videos had been lost because there was apparently a corruption problem when they were uploaded a certain way. Anyways, we found episode 2 and 3 that we thought we'd lost. Yes. Now, just to warn you, there may be a slight discontinuity in what we've talked about because we recorded those things 6 months ago. So we just skimmed through them. We're going to do our best to try to be on point. But we might, if we do say the same thing again, I apologize. Certainly not intentional. So I'm going to bring up chapter 4. Something I do want to mention just out of the gate, which I know we had mentioned this at some point in the original recordings. I don't know where it is, and we didn't listen to the whole thing. Right. But there had been discussion of and I'm pretty sure that video was corrupted and lost. So there had been some discussion of the inspiration behind these things. And I originally intended to have, because I actually owned some of the original Ninja Turtles books when I was a kid. Did you ever have any of the old ones?
No, my first introduction was Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles.
Right, the British version.
Right.
Yes.
And then in the States it was the Teenage Mutant...
because the word ninja's too violent for British children.
And of course, nunchakus can't be done.
Right.
So that's why grappling hook eventually became the thing of Michelangelo.
Did they literally remove it from the animation?
Pretty much.
Jesus. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I heard about that. I didn't know how they fixed it though. Okay.
A lot of editing.
Yeah. Well, it's because they did the same thing with
right. And then
Tenchi,
that's why eventually in the animated series during the 97 one, it eventually had it where he went from the nunchucks.
Yeah.
And that's why you saw the grappling hook.
Okay. Well, and you did. I didn't. But, well, okay, so I actually had... So before the term graphic novel was popularized, they had this thing called the collected volume, which is what they were doing. And it was this huge, thick book that had, the first 15 issues of Ninja Turtles in it, right? And I had that. Unfortunately, our friend Keenan is still borrowing it, so I was supposed to have it for the video. What I have today, though, is this. Holy crap, you need to get these things from IDW. This is the third one. This one has the end of the original story arc of the Ninja Turtles. God damn, this is a good book. This was actually a replacement because I had the original Return to New York graphic novel, trade paperback. Somebody had lost it. So this was the replacement for the one that was lost. This book, just kind of a fun thing, has 7 books in it. Full hardback. It's like a $40 book, $50 book. The original trade, which is about this little thinner than this, comparable to this book, right, was the same price because it's just so rare because they were printed on newsprint. But I used to read the original Ninja Turtles books as a kid, and that had a huge impact on the development of this series. One of the things I'm sure I may have mentioned this in another one. I'm going to mention it again. There was the discussion of how we were going to approach the creative process of how's the book going to be presented, right? Is it be color or black and white? And a lot of it had to do with economics because we only had so much money at the beginning, and Tayson's already doing so much for free. Didn't really have a solution for color, and later on he's like, I'll do the colors. It's such a good deal, but. And we do want to put the book out in color now, but the cost and economics is just, there will be a color re-release, but I can't do it until we get a bit further along in the second graphic novel because we need a color standard that Tayson's generating that we can show to the new flatter and have him copy it.
Right.
And then at that point, Alex can come in and finish off the process. But until we have the color language established to show the new guy, nothing we can do. So, but... I wanted a black and white book, partially because it was affordable, ridiculously affordable. It's from the print on demand company, it's like $1.67 per issue versus $2.72 for color, and you can still sell it for the same price.
Right.
What a deal.
Right. As indie goes, it is kind of that level of, yes, when you have so many units per volume of what you're selling. So if you're looking to get into being a comic reader, you are going to be looking at this unless for whatever reason, you want to just do it online. But even then, I would still say, like, look at building your comic book so that it can actually be printed.
Yeah.
Because I have heard from so many web artists where it's like, oh, I had this thing. It was my intention just to basically create something.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, create something that is like, I'm just going to post online for my friends and such.
Yeah, you really need to think
go
about
like,
how that's going to go.
Wow, I got a fan base. I got like this capability where I can make this a sustainable part of like my income opposed to doing other various things. And then the problem comes up is like, you got these beautiful pages, and then suddenly you go from like having this book where you're reading it, and then have to have like a page where suddenly it does something like this, because the way that you initially made it on screen.
So that's actually a good point to bring up, because like, okay, we use Kablam. There are other print-on-demand printers. There's no superior company. They all have their advantages. We like Kablam because they give you a full turnkey delivery system. So you have the ability to basically link an online store. It doesn't cost you anything. It's fantastic. And for me, that's probably like, they are not the cheapest service available. They're not the most expensive, but that for me adds more value, right? But the thing is whoever you're using, they have a style guide. They have a reference sheet that says everything must fit in this shape, and we won't name names, but Alex and I have had to deal with
and
artists who refuse to look at that, and then they produce pages.
Actually, that's been one of my biggest parts within the two companies is between Thunderfrog Studios and Miniature Dragons is the joy of being a graphic designer with a background of fine arts is I got this weird spectrum of the, here's all the artsy fartsy kind of stuff, and here's all the technical stuff, and knowing all these middle things of making it look pretty but actually functional so that it can actually print.
Well, the key point is if you're laying out your page, you're designing your page, right? You have to know, you have to think in terms of how will I eventually print this? And the reality is sometimes, okay, if you don't pay attention to that, you can't print that page. And what you have to, like, you don't even know the monkey business I've had to go through to make some of these things work. And the disgusting thing is like we've dealt with graduates. You weren't part of this necessarily, but like I've had graduates from prestigious schools work for me that got the job entirely on the basis of their resume from their education, and they didn't know the most fundamental basics of how to lay out a page. And I've actually written letters to those schools saying, hey, what are you doing? You know, like, your students can't even do the job. Like, what kind of people are you graduating here? And I got a very nice letter back from the school saying, hey, wow, I'm so sorry. We're going to address our curriculum. So that was great. But anyways, we get off topic. So the Ninja Turtles
has definitely been an inspiration.
Yeah. A lot of this was basically it was a love letter to what I enjoyed as a kid, because the other half of it is I was very comfortable going with black and white because I had read these things, and it's like, you know, you look at this book and this is clearly meant to be a black and white book. I mean, this. And that kind of gets back to also what Alex is saying is if you're doing black and white, you have to know how to ink for black and white.
Right, and also it goes into a part of coloring. So within this series, they did a re-release of a color version. And I made mention before...
This one is the one he's talking about. And
within it, it's like I've seen it where it's like the re-release... Actually, here's a great example.
Here it is, right there.
So actually, it's within this.
Yeah.
So for me in particular, I think this is a very beautiful part of artwork, but at the same time, I didn't feel like it matched up. Actually, this is a page.
This is the 2-page spread of that character, and this looks amazing in black and white, and it did not work in color.
Right. Well, it translates different. So
very different.
One of the things within coloring is, and inking, is the amount of detail and what it needs to be shown. Yeah. So there is a difference between, in general, you don't need to have all those detail lines. Yeah. You don't need all that kind of stuff because the colorist will go in and enhance what's being shown within the page.
Yep.
So it does become a different part of like a standard black and white needs a lot of extra parts to it to, you know, convey the fact of this character has scales, this person has bark texture, this individual has this kind of muscles or what's going on. Whereas if you're doing something for color, it can change part of that. Now it becomes too busy if you have all these extra lines that show bark or scales.
It's also worth mentioning, now looking back at, we still have to get back to chapter 4. So we originally produced this book for black and white, and it reads really well in black and white. But one thing that was nice about the way Tayson did it is that it doesn't have the shading that you normally get in a black and white book. And that means that we actually have the freedom to bring it into color later without losing anything.
Oh, yeah. Right. You're talking about, in general, there's a lot of cross-hatching.
Yeah.
And...
exactly.
Like, actually...
Well, this one is more like what we're talking about, because this particular, these pages here don't have a lot of the extra shading. And it's actually worth mentioning that in Return to New York, the story that we're referencing here, 3 different artists worked on it. Like 3 different inkers worked on each issue. So, but fast forwarding here, so this is a different inker in this section, right? And this is inked for black and white. Completely different look and feel. I mean, as a reader, as a kid reading this, I didn't feel like I was missing anything having the change, but it is a bit of a jarring change, and you wouldn't want to color this. This is not the way you would do it if you're going to color it. And one of the nice things, again, about how we did it is that the way Tayson colored it, you didn't feel like you were missing shading because he uses like line work instead of cross-hatching and stuff. But or in this case, what they call the Pantones, where it's like those plastic sheets you would put on your page that have the cross-hatching built in. But it's like.
But it's once again of
really
like
well.
Tayson's work really has that almost very cartoon kind of look to it. And once again, why...
But that's what we were looking for.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention real quick, since we're busting out books, is my original introduction to the Ninja Turtles was these things. So this is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness. It's the original role-playing game put out by Palladium Books. And I had bought this entirely on the reputation of the comic book series. Because back when I was a kid, if you were a guy, you were reading Ninja Turtles in the indie scene, right? And if you were a girl, it was ElfQuest. Thank you. And what was fun about these books is that they actually featured comic books. Let me see if I can find it. It's here it is. So there were comic books in these things that were and pages are falling out. I've used this book a lot. That were in continuity, part of the original series that until recently had never been reprinted. IDW finally put them out. But if you didn't have these books, you would never be able to read them. And it was fun because I was telling Tayson about this game, and he'd never even heard of it. And at the time, and didn't even know about these comics, and he was rushing out to go find these things. And they're great, all this fun artwork. But you could make mutant animal characters. You could you see, like, they have examples here of like how it might work. And it wasn't just the turtles; it was all kinds of things. There's a whole series of books, and basically focusing on all the various aspects of the Ninja Turtles comic books, from time travel to space travel and all these things. And it's great fun. And this was part of, for me, part of the influence, a big part of the influence of this book, because for me, the idea of doing a mutant animal series was pretty natural. And another thing, I mentioned this in the special features in the back of the graphic novel, but I mentioned this book here, Mutants Down Under, which is the post-apocalyptic Australia book, definitely in the Mad Max style. But it was interesting because this is actually what inspired me to make the character of Quad, where I decided to do a platypus, because I don't know where it is in here, but I remember seeing a messed up looking platypus in this book, and oh yeah, here he is. Obviously, Quad looks nothing like that, but they had these great just what they did with the mutant animals, and it's just, this is what I grew up with. So naturally, I'm making a comic book based on it.
Right, and I think that goes into as creating any kind of like property and such is taking inspirations from what you actually grew up with.
Oh yeah.
And also that fact of now you've shared it with Tayson, plus sharing it with anyone that's watching this and
totally.
various other individuals, like your experience with Ninja Turtles, plus the fact of Thunderfrog itself.
Yeah, and it's funny because if we had actually done what we originally were planning at the beginning, it would have been a book about dragons. Well, let's go back to the comic book because people signed up for the commentary. So, Chapter 4 begins with the legend that was being told about the history of the hammer and the original Thunderfrog mythological character. And we're picking up with that story where they've just entered the Tower of Enoadar and they have encountered the Guardian. And
I gotta say, it's like I love the way that how legend and reality are kind of two different things.
Yeah, well, it's also
but I mean, not to go into any spoilers, but I mean, it's like one of the things that's illustrated here is the fact of conveying part of a story of, you know, Tayson showing off his art skills and showing the monster and showing what individuals in this world see this mythos,
or what
this
they imagine
story.
it to be. And
right.
It's actually funny because now that I'm looking at it, because when we had done this originally, we weren't really. I mean, it's obvious. Like, if a modern audience would read this book, go, "Oh, they're copying Groot." But when we did this comic book, there was no Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't even.
Well, the original comic.
Well,
but
the
movie you're talking about.
The movie version. I don't think Tayson had ever seen the comic book Groot. I don't even think he looked like this in 2011. But it's like, did we even have Iron Man back then? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. But we didn't have Guardians of the Galaxy. It wasn't popularized, and it's like this thing is basically behaving like the Groot monster, but then it suddenly has laser eyes. and what's funny is as Alex kind of alluded to, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this in the or we may talk about it in the other video, but it's like, this is a creature or a thing that is guarding the tower, and it doesn't actually look like this in real life. It does exist. This thing is a real thing in our world. I guess I can give that away, but
right.
but it's like, and the plan is for it to be seen at some point and met. But when I was talking with Tayson about it, he again doesn't know entirely what's coming down the line because he's also a fan. He wants to be surprised, but I did
Which
tell
always
him,
makes it kind of an interesting part of like working on these various projects.
Yeah.
Where there's that kind of fine level between knowing enough and still wanting to be surprised by these projects.
Oh yeah.
And it's like one of the things of telling Woody, it's like, I don't really want to know too much about like the next volume.
Well,
because it's kind of like I want to, actually get to see it.
Right, but if something happened to me, you might have to. So,
right.
Anyways, Shannon, my girlfriend, has read the first issue. It's all she's read so far. She loves it to death, and even though she could get the entire story out of me, she doesn't want it. She's like, "No, what are you doing? Don't tell me that." And
you do have a horrible tendency of telling people.
Well, not
yes.
this.
I know.
Not this one. No, but so Tayson was told what the creature actually looks like. Okay, and the instructions were, how would the appearance of this thing have changed over time as the story gets told, originally in an oral history, eventually written down, and then people reinterpret it, and it's like, oh well, we're gonna Bible this thing up and change it, whatever. Anyways, so this is what he came up with, and it's a wonderfully designed creature, and there are elements of the real thing here, but
right, and
it had to have hints of the real thing. But damn, and it's also interesting that, like the actual Thunderfrog character, the historical one, he's clearly represented as a larger than life individual, and the real character would not have been so Conan'd up, so
right.
heroic. But
no, the way that I like to say is within chapter 4, within part of this sequence of events. This is almost the cinematic version.
Yeah.
This is like showing the audience of what a director does of the reinterpretation of the book from the original story that was told.
Yeah.
And just the way that between the panel arrangement and also just the character designs and things like that, it feels like that, cinematic part.
Yeah.
It has that part, like one of the scenes that we're looking at currently has the original Thunderfrog bounce from one spot to another.
And I want to mention that because Tayson was like, okay, I was talking to Tayson about the scenes. Okay, so he has to be able to, like, what's going to happen is he's like they can't kill this thing, they can't defeat it. So his plan is to lure the thing into basically charging him and hit the wall and go through the wall and go off the cliff, right, and go over the side. And he is supposed to basically leap out of the way at the last second. And again, modified version of the historical events, right? But Tayson's plan to have it be where, instead of having him bounce off walls, he had him bounce off the inside of the comic book panels. Yeah. And I thought that was brilliant. What a fun way, because it's like, why not? This is somebody's fanciful interpretation of an actual historical event. It's like, we have the story of Spartacus, right? Like, how much of that's true, how much of it is fiction and embellished, who knows? We know he probably lived, but, the tale's been, like, reinterpreted so many times, even before Hollywood. Like, what do we, like...
Oh, yeah.
For all we know, it was just a popular novel back then.
Right, I mean, it's like how much of Beowulf has been, like, altered.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, was he real? We don't know. I mean, like, we're not the only people to write fiction. For all we know, some of those ancient stories and legends that like for all we know, the mythological figures that we think people were worshiping might have been the superheroes of that era. We don't know, anyways. So but yeah, so we have this sequence, and then we see the Thunderfrog, who's literally like the last man standing of his party, comes forth, finds the hammer embedded in the wall, pulls it out, and then we have like, the big hero shot.
Right.
And does it ever strike you as weird that we gave the frogs teeth?
You know what? No, I mean, for like,
it's one of those things you would never notice, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just like, I think it just goes into like when we were talking about number one, there's these the land lobsters.
Yeah.
This is just a different world, and it just happens to have the fact of like there are humanoid animals.
Well, they give the turtles teeth too. I'm looking at this here, and I'm not sure if turtles actually have teeth. I know they have beaks sometimes, but anyways, okay. So we have the hammer of Inoadar. Did we ever explain what Inoadar meant?
Not yet, and we should wait on that.
Yeah, okay, why not? So, anyways, we come back to Theo's uncle. He's now telling the story, and everybody's all like, having a good time. And, of course, the Martis is a total killjoy. Is like, yeah, whatever. Oh, my God, I love that character. And it's fun how, kind of like, how real, like, the character, like, to a degree, the character's interpretations came to be. Because it's like, Theo is all depressed and upset and just worried. Because he has this big responsibility on his shoulders that's bigger than him. And there's only one place that's at the end of the line for him, like kind of from his perspective, because like he's not a trained warrior. Like, how does he come out of this alive? At the end, because he doesn't want to.
He doesn't have the combat experience of the other characters within the group.
Even his friend Helene, his best friend, can still handle herself in a fight because she's a trained hunter, right? She knows how to shoot a bow, and this poor guy. Look at this picture; he's all like just completely overwhelmed with
quite distraught.
Yeah, the immensity of it, and this is what I envisioned, and it's what I wanted, because you do want a flawed hero. You don't want a perfect hero. You want somebody that is more relatable.
Right, and I mean it goes into like that hero's journey or various other aspects of developing the character from. And the books that you pulled out earlier is a good example of part of that. Role-playing really does help indicate of, starting at this low level and building up your character and eventually becoming a lot better. But
and look how smug the squire looks. And so all these aspects of it, like, Tayson just brought this to life in a way that... like I could never have hoped for. Oh, no, this is fun too. You'll notice if you look really close that this is one of the problems you run into with black and white you have to watch out for. If you look really close, you got this part where Quad is kneeling down in front of Theo going, I swear my life to protect you. And if you look, the mortar on the background on the wall is actually gray. It's not black. And lacking knowledge of Photoshop, my only option at the time was to basically put a film over it, which was slightly white and slightly translucently white. and create and wrap it around. It's a whole trip. I should never have gone to that much effort, but I should have just had Alex do it. But the thing is that it needed to be done. That's one of those aspects you have to come back from an editorial perspective and look at the artwork, and it needed to be done because the way it was before, the characters vanished into the background. And one of the things we've run into this before, I met an artist one time at a Comic-Con who had this idea that no, the art is everything. Screw you. Where do you get off covering up his artwork? And my response is he works for me. This guy's job was to create space for the text, and if he didn't, the text has to go somewhere. You don't get to tell me what to do to my book. I didn't have that argument with the guy, but the guy was such an arrogant SOB. Holy shit. And what, the swearing?
Yeah,
okay, fair enough. So, but like the thing is that there is an editorial phase in the artwork, right, where the artist has turned the art in. It's the artist's job to interpret the story and present it in a clear and concise way and to enhance the story, right. not to kind of have an ego trip. And you have
no, and I think both of us
you have to make changes sometimes to fix it.
Between the two of us, we've seen enough various comic books that we reviewed, and plus that we just read because we are fans of comic books.
Yeah.
That I can recall within just some of the ones that we've dealt with where it changes part of the flow, like where word bubbles are can really actually change part of like, okay, is this individual talking? Is this within the order of things? Basically, you just read a certain way, and if a bubble up here is actually supposed to be down here, it can change the way that it just comes across. Like,
well, if it's done right, you're supposed to follow the left to right sequence of Western comics, or reversed in the case of Eastern comics. But like, what's supposed to happen is that you're supposed to have, you can put the balloons anywhere you want, but you're supposed to control the eye line of the reader, and so everything is laid out. And when I get done laying out a page, I usually have to go back and double check it, and you're like, oh, I need to move this, because like you're in the moment, and you come back and go. And so
you step on back and you basically look at the flow.
And the idea is what you've written has to control the flow. And if you have a text box a little bit too low on the page, it's actually going to direct people to the next panel, not direct them to the next part of that panel. And that's one of the things. That's kind of like where I'm upset with the new Robotech comics that are being put out, where they got some guy on there with things that doesn't understand this. And that's not to say I'm perfect. I mean, like, you're looking at my earlier work here, but
I mean, that's a showcase of like any person that does any kind of thing. One, you've just got to keep on going and doing.
Yeah.
But two, it's like you've got to learn from what you did in the past.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of successful parts, but it's like you can see the parts where it's like how you've grown as a letterist. Oh. How you've grown as a writer, how you've grown as like doing art and various other aspects.
Shoot, I dropped my stylus. This is fun. So we have this sequence here as we're scrolling through, and we have basically there's this argument going on where Martis is absolutely convinced that by birthright of his nobility, he should be the one to hold the hammer, and yet, this, as he put it, this dirt farmer is the one, and it's like, and he's so upset and so arrogant. Is like. It's like, where do you get off speaking my name? And there's this great sequence where Tayson has him glaring at Theo, and Theo's just trying to make peace, and he just sticks his tongue out at him and storms off. And then we kind of go into more of the explanation from the old man. And then there was this other part here, now the opposite corner, right? So we had this part in the right-hand corner that was all blacked out in the background. Tayson does it sometimes for a dramatic effect. And then we had the, and this gets to the point where I'm saying, like, sometimes an editorial decision has to be made on the artwork, right? And we have the bottom left-hand corner, I have it black, right? Because the black communicates how Theo's feeling a little more strongly, and it also stylistically matches with the fact there's another chunk of black in the page. It helps balance things out. But the original page, which I actually found the other day while I was going in and recovering old lost stuff from the emails, because we had to find old things that were missing. The original page wasn't like that. It was more like there was a big white background behind him, like he's being hit with a soft spotlight or something. And the original background didn't work. It it killed the feel of the page, and you lost it. It made the page feel weirdly lopsided. It just didn't communicate right. And so I just came in and just wrapped a black thing around him, and then suddenly you have this. It works, you know. And again, that's where you have to have an editorial hat you wear, and you have to look at what communicates a story. And you know, treating the artwork as sacrosanct and untouchable and perfect, that doesn't serve the story, you know. And you know, if you've got the right artist, he will understand, you know. Because like there were plenty of pages in the course of this book where Tayson turned something in, it looked fine on pencils, then when you actually did it, it's like, oh, this doesn't really work, shit. And we had to go in and make you know, significant changes sometimes, but you know, it's like
Right.
It's what you have to do, and Tayson's not offended because he's a good sport, he's up for it.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes into any kind of property of, say, movie making, where you take a look at all these various pieces, all these clips, and you know, reshots come in where you know, that might have worked, but part of the pacing, the editing down, you know, really does change part of the story. And sometimes that's, you know, that argument of why did they decide to keep this within the final cut? You know, but with an artwork, you know, I get it. You know, it's somebody going in and drawing it either electronically or by hand, and then doing whatever that needs to be done. But at the same time, does it help serve the story? Does it help? And your point about basically having these, since we're looking off screen at another device that has the PDF,
right.
There's a lot of parts where there's just some fantastic backgrounds, and then there's other parts within it where it's a character or two characters and black background, and it just makes it really pop out, especially with the characters, because
gives it more emotion too.
Right. One, it's that psychological part of emotion, and two, it really does help convey like what's going on. It makes the characters more of the focus. If the background was there, I think a lot of times it would get lost because some of the scenes just don't become as impactful.
There's another point I'm thinking about here too, and this is something we have to be way more careful about. You know, coming forward now. Generally, when you're doing a comic book, if it's a professional comic book, you have the penciler, you have the inker, then you have the colorist, and you have the letterist or letterer. Sorry, I'm talking like you. But anyways, like and then the editorial hat comes in, and you have various people at various stages which are reviewing the work and make sure everything's correct, hopefully. And they're not always perfect, but you know, it's a team effort. Now, the smaller the production, the fewer people are doing these things. Okay, so sometimes it's one guy doing everything. Sometimes you got 2 or 3 people. Now, the advantage to this book is because it was black and white. When you're dealing with black and white is very forgiving. Okay, and when you have something that we had to fix, it was very easy to fix because, like, we had a sequence one time on one of the pages coming up.
I definitely want to make mention on that.
Yeah.
So it's within. If you got somebody that has like some basic skills within either, say, Photoshop, some other type of program. You know, graphic design really does help because one of the things is, you know, if you're lucky, you have files sent to you that actually have multiple layers and you can go in and edit it.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It makes like a job like mine and super easy and simple.
And we haven't always had that.
Now, that is very the case.
Yeah.
Now, say you need a character to be altered, changed, and such. Well, that's all well and good if here's this new file that's coming in of the character going from this to this.
Yeah.
Well, the problem there is, like this background right here, if my hand's like this opposed to like this, I have to change and make sure that this is actually showable now.
Yeah.
Where this will, you know, get cut out.
Yeah. And but also you have the fact is that, again, black and white is super forgiving, and you can get away with a lot in black and white that you could not get away with in color. And
because
so,
like one of the big things is like, for example, the gradients within it. Now, if you don't have the original file, it can be quite difficult. It's doable, but it's quite difficult to like match it back up.
Yeah, and like one example coming up in I think this was in chapter 6. No, chapter 5. It's next issue. There's a part we'll talk about it more when we get there. We had to remove a panel from the page because there was just this mistake. My fault, but we had to remove the panel, and we had to turn this one panel into the whole page, and that required adding an element to the page, which Alex was able to do. You can't tell the difference. Brilliant. But if we had the thing in color, it might not have been possible. And
it was possible. It would be possible. It would just be such a pain in the...
Right. Exactly. And so, but it had to be done in this particular case.
Right.
Because it wasn't going to fly. And so where we're at right now with the book, if you're reading any of the pages from issue 7, Tayson is now going straight from inks to colors. And so we have to be very careful now, because if we have a problem where there is something that goes wrong and we have to make a change, if one guy is doing both hats, doing colors and pencils and inks, suddenly it's like, oh wow, if there's a mistake, you could be stuck with that mistake.
Right.
And that was one of the because when we were doing Cyber Symbiosis, the first issue, everything was colored and inked and drawn by the same person. That didn't work. We had to bring in a separate colorist. We ended up finding somebody we like who was doing a fine job. But, it's like...
But now it becomes that level of...
Yeah.
If there's any type of corrections, it does become that level of... for anyone that is interested in making this kind of comics, you got multiple people, be kind to them. Give them files that are actually edible.
Yeah.
Things that are flattened, which if you don't understand that, I'm not going to go into detail on here.
Watch a tutorial. But
the point is, it does become quite a difference of, like, once the example is this level of gradient is much harder to do when it's a flattened image. And if you actually have the multiple layers, it does make it doable. It's less of a pain,
and save multiple versions of your project at different stages.
Yes.
Do not flatten it and then save over the old one.
Yeah, we've had some people that we've worked with that have done that.
Oh my god. Okay, so anyways, let's move forward. So okay, so we're looking at the cremation scene. Oh, this is fun. Okay, so we have the cremation scene. Now, originally, this scene takes place at night. Okay, originally, what the background here, because like you come into the page, see the cremation. If this was fully colored, it would be shaded, but it's hard to do. So, some of the darkness shadowing is very hard to accomplish when you're dealing with black and white, so you just kind of leave it white sometimes. But then we come to the sequence where we have the sky, and the original sky was white. And that doesn't work because it's a nighttime scene. So I came in and I created a gradient fade from black to gray to white, and kind of matching, just how the sky normally changes, and that really helped the scene. It was a little tricky getting it in there because again I had to use the masking tool, which took hours, but it was one of those things that had to be done, and it really did enhance the scene and create the mood we were looking for, because you have to set time, in these things, and it's one of those aspects of black and white comics versus color. Like the visual language is very different. And then we cut ahead to the next day, and we see this character who now I think we talked about him a little bit already. We're just going to cut to the chase. So we have this rhinoceros character who had appeared very briefly in issue 2, right? And he was the guy one of the guys knocked off the bridge when Tayson took him out. And again, I don't remember if I mentioned this at the time, but it's one of those things where Tayson, and I've had this happen in other books, where Tayson just was told to just put some soldiers out there. It doesn't matter what they are. Put some soldiers out there. And then, but then we have this part in the story where it's like, okay, well, one of them has to come back and file a report, which who's it going to be? And this was not something that I had thought with necessarily when I was writing the book. I just knew one of them did, but I didn't think of who it was. And Tayson basically created this character. And I think I called him Geyer, is the name that I ended up giving him. Gyre. And so but
that goes into that collaboration of
exactly
that one, it's your creation, but at the same time you are also kind of handing it off to Tayson, and he's putting in his
and so we when we had to pick somebody, we looked at who was there and was like, well, let's go with the rhinoceros character. He's the most interesting character for me, right?
Right.
You probably would have picked somebody else, but like, because you see it differently. But we look at this, and he finally makes it back to the camp after some time of hiking back. He's the only survivor, or he's the only one that made it back, and he comes to talk to the general, and so we have this rhinoceros character, and he makes his report, blah blah blah. But what's interesting about this character is that when it came time to look at, okay, now we have to build who the cast is for the next graphic novel, and one of the characters in the story, not going to ruin it at this point, like if you're reading these things or watching these videos out of order, but one of the characters has a very different story than everybody else in book 2, and this rhinoceros character got promoted to main character status because of his appearance here, and how he kind of mattered. And he's now going to be traveling and being part of the main story in the adventure in the second book. And so that's all because Tayson created a character that was so interesting and had such character to him. But we also had this, it's like kicking back of like, there's problems here too, because like he's talking to the general, and then we have the situation where Tayson made this kind of this mistake where the page was this one panel was put together, where the general it's the final panel that he appears in the book, and he's talking to the general, and there's no way to connect the conversation. In actuality, see, they're off to the left. They actually should have been all the way to the right. And I suppose we probably could have fixed that, and maybe we will one day when we color it. Probably will when we color it, actually. But the fact of the matter is that those characters are in the wrong place for the conversation they're having. And what I ended up doing was trying to make it look so that the tail is behind the general. I don't know if it really works well because it's very subtle. But I mean, you read it, you'll get it. But when we go back to the color one, I think we're definitely gonna move it over and fix it so they're in the right place. But it's just one of those funny little things where by the time I got the pencils, I got the colors back, and suddenly it's like, oh dear,
Yeah.
and it just didn't work. But anyways, then we have this big reveal that the general is talking to somebody who's either can turn invisible or is appearing there, has been watching him and giving him advice. And it's this strange, almost demonic thing that is apparently the power behind the throne of this army that's invading from the east. And this is his only appearance here in the main story. And I hope that it communicates well, and it interests the reader. But one thing I kind of looking at it now, I kind of wish that I'd picked a different font for his language, for his speaking, and I really can't fix it. I guess I could, but it's too much trouble. But looking at it, it just feels very derivative and unoriginal. At the time, I thought, oh, what a cool font, but I was kind of new to lettering, right. And I didn't realize that I was picking a font that looks so interesting that hundreds of other comic book creators also use it too. and I should have dug a little deeper, but it's what we have.
Right.
Whatever.
Well, it's kind of one of those things of do your research. It definitely does help when you're doing these projects, but at the same time, you obviously, since hundreds of others have used it, you did have that right gut kind of situation.
Oh yeah, no, it's fun
because there are some properties out there where it does become So it's definitely one of those ones where if I was going to do it over again, I would pick a different font. But we have it. We're stuck with it. Sorry, somebody just came home, so we're going to keep going. But there is an interesting point here because, like as we've covered in other videos, there are little subtle elements of discontinuity to the setting, right? Like we talked about how there's like in actuality, kind of getting into the big reveal in chapter 2 where we have like the big monastery scene, right? And I talked about how there was, if I remember right, we had talked about how the original version had iron bars, right? And it's like, where'd they get the metal, Tayson? And I was able to find that picture, and so that picture's in the back of the graphic novels. People can see it, but it's like, there's still elements of that structure and other structures on this world that are indications of an older, possibly more advanced civilization that may have lived here, right? And looking at this demonic creature, like, there's this element on him
that not one person has ever come back and said, "Hey, man, what's with this?" And if you look really close, I don't know if I want to mention it. It's kind of obvious, but if you look at his outfit, there's something on his outfit that doesn't belong.
Yeah,
And
I can definitely take notice of it right
yeah,
now, but I think for video purposes, I think it would be better for the audience to take a look at yourself. What page is that?
I'm not sure what page is going
Oh,
to be in the graphic novel because we're shuffling pages around right now.
right.
So it's, I mean, I know in the original issue it's page 17 of chapter 4, but it's one of those things where it's like I don't know what page it's going to be because we're doing the final layout today and pages are moving, so
It's all kinds of
yeah,
shuffling.
it a little bit, yeah. But yeah, like it's an interesting thing, and then Tayson, of course, knows what this thing is and who this thing is, and so that also was useful because it's like, okay, well, this is what it really is, but it needs to look mysterious, and there needs to be something. Anyways, knowing what it really is, and then modifying the presentation, it's like, they're it trying to create something which still carries the feel of what it is, but doesn't reveal it. It leaves a hint so the reader can go, "What is this?" That's part of, again, where you have to have your collaboration with your creative team and figure out like the right way to present things, because this is a point where you could blow it. The entire story could be blown if you don't do it right. And I definitely don't want that. Moving ahead to basically the climax of the story, and this is basically our Empire Strikes Back moment. The Thunderfrog basically follows a similar narrative structure as the Star Wars trilogy, where you have the first two issues are kind of like A New Hope, where you've introduced your characters, they have their big adventure, and they kind of save the day, and then have to fight the bad guys, and you just when it's done, who everybody is and where they fit into it. And then and as George Lucas puts it, in Empire, you had to get them into the worst situation they could ever have been in, and then the conclusion is how they get out of it, right? And that's what happens here, is that everybody wakes up and suddenly find out that the hammer's been stolen, and oh, look at that, a member of the party's missing, and look at that, I had to make the mortar gray again, and everybody's running out, and this is an interesting moment where Martis, the squire, had to, it's like he feels so offended that he had this moment of, okay, well, the hammer will never work for me, but I'm supposed to have it. Do I be a man of honor and just suck it up, or do I take off?
Or am I justified by my means?
Yeah, yeah, it's my status in life. Does that make me right? And he had to make that decision, and this is the moment that basically defines him for the rest of his life. Like he's basically, he had two choices. He can be a man of honor, or he can just be some elitist scumbag, and he made the wrong choice, and he steals the hammer, and then it finds out that there's this character that's been following them this whole time, Hadron, and this turtle character. Now, this is a fun one too, because this character, I made the creative decision not to reveal him before now, and we could have. And looking back, I'm not sure if I should have revealed him, but basically the first time, when Theo had used the hammer at the bridge, right? And used the lightning to knock all the bad guys off the bridge into the river, he was nearby, right? And he saw that, and he's been following them ever since, and waiting for an opportunity to take the hammer for himself, for whatever he thinks. Now, he's presented here specifically to look like he's the bad guy, but he's not actually a villain at all. If you've read the graphic novel, you probably know that at this point, but it's like he's a super experienced warrior. He's been out there fighting for his life. There's more about him in the back of the graphic novel in the art section, so we won't rehash the same material. But he has, his attitude is more like he can tell that Martis is just a chump, and that he's not, he's all talk. Like he actually can't back it up. Like his attitude, he doesn't have the experience and then the skill. Whereas this guy, he's old, he's experienced, he's the real deal, and he basically takes Martis down like a chump, and puts him down for the count with ease, and walks off with the hammer. and is completely just dismissive of him, and he really puts Martis in his place, and knocks out some teeth, and I like this scene because it makes him look like he's the villain, just stole the thing, and a lot,
Right.
and the main characters think that he's part of the enemy army, but it's like,
No, I get it. I mean, it's kind of that level of, if you look at things at face value of just black and white,
yeah,
then yeah, it's like, oh, here's a hero, here's a villain, but at the same time, it's these different shades of different opinions, different motivation.
yeah,
Like the characters don't necessarily, I would say, have really a good or evil kind of aspect. It's just more of what their moral compass is.
Yeah.
What is their expectations of what they're doing? Do they try to justify it based off of what their mindset, their culture, and attitudes are? Do you think that if Theo was there interacting initially first, would have that actually happened, that combat?
Well, that's an interesting point because, like, I'm looking at this right now, and this is, I think, probably one of my favorite things I've ever written, actually, because it's such a simple scene, but it's like he goes, "Excuse me, I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you," and it's like immediately Martis,
Because that does make it like so he does know that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Theo's been having that.
Yeah, no, he knows, and he says, "I am the rightful owner of the hammer." He says, "Oh, then prove it with pleasure." So you got this guy who, in the form of Martis, he's like, he has to. That's the thing, is he has to be right when somebody has committed a crime like this, or they've done something. It's kind of like how lies persist, right? Like, you now have to justify it because you can't be wrong, and he doesn't. He has to prove he has something to prove. It's basically that's at the basis of Martis. He has something to prove, and the fact that this person that he considers to be insignificant is better than him, and something he can't handle that, and it's amazing. He never even connects. Like he literally he swings, misses. Like this turtle character is a bruiser. He's not even nimble, and he easily evaded that shot.
Right.
Grabs him by the fist and just blasts him and takes him down with one punch. And that's amazing. And like Hadron, I knew I wanted a turtle in the book because of this. Because I love the Ninja Turtles. There has to be something of the Ninja Turtles here because it's a tribute.
Right.
And but I needed a character that was the exact opposite of Ninja Turtles. That is not derivative in any way other than his appearance. He is everything they are not. He is big. He's strong. He's not graceful. He's a bruiser. He gets in there and mixes it up and lets his armor soak the damage, just beats things up, and is able to defend himself by just being a good swordsman. But he can take the hit, and he's got a lot of power behind his hits, whereas the turtles are just graceful. They're strong. Obviously, they're drawn to be muscular, but they are, they're more grace and stealth and craftiness, where he just says, "Screw it. I'm,
Brute strength.
Strength." And he was, because we're looking at, like, I talk about this a little bit in the back of the book, but like this was created to somewhat to like pretty faithfully emulate the formula of a D&D RPG party, to have a comic book that could, if you're a gamer, you can relate to this as well. And he is basically the classic barbarian. He's a character that had a few levels of knight or warrior or something, and then switched to the barbarian class. And that's pretty much where we end. There's a few other special features things which are going to be in the book, which I'll let those speak for themselves. I wrote a little bit of like a piece of a legend, which I thought was interesting, and there's some concept art, which is all this is in the back of the graphic novel. But after this, it's chapters 5 and 6, the dramatic conclusion to the book. Is there anything you wanted to add before we call it?
I think we should wrap this up and get on to the next one.
All right, on.
Thank you for viewing.
Yeah.
Bye.